The cold metal pressed against the skin of my back, even before the first blow. It wasn't the steel cable itself, but the expectation of it, hanging in the heavy, dusty air of the courtyard. The smell of rust and dry earth filled my nostrils. Everyone in end of the line was there, forming a silent, hungry circle around me. Their faces were masks of dirt and resignation. The same faces I saw every day, but today they were different. They were judges, witnesses, and in their inaction, accomplices. In the center of it all was Corbin. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like for more stories like this. He wasn't a large man, but his presence filled the space. In his early 50s, he had the posture of someone who had never been crossed. His shirt, once white, was a map of grease and sweat stains. He held the cable with a familiarity that turned my stomach. His power didn't come from strength, but from control. He controlled the food, the water, the parts. He controlled lives. And now, he wanted to control mine. I had refused. I had said no to his proposal of union, a pretty word for servitude. An engineer like me was a valuable asset, and he liked to own valuable things. My no was a miscalculation in his world, a piece that didn't fit into his machine of power. And now, the machine was going to crush me. His small, deep-set eyes sought mine. He expected pleading, he expected tears, he expected me to bow. I gave him none of it. I locked my gaze on his, an act of defiance that was all I had left. The silence stretched, tense. I saw the corner of his mouth twitch in irritation. Then the air whistled. The first lash tore across my back like a metal tooth. A blinding, white-hot pain exploded in my spine, but I didn't scream. I bit the inside of my cheek, tasting blood mixed with dust. My gaze remained fixed on Corbin. Another lash, and another. The world became a nauseating rhythm of silence and sharp pain. In the midst of my agony, my peripheral vision caught a movement, or rather, the lack of it. Near the settlement's decrepit gates, leaning against a concrete pillar, was a man I only knew by sight, a nomad from the wastelands. He came by every now and then to trade rare parts or medicinal plants. Kale. He was older, maybe close to 40, with the kind of lean, tough body that only life out there could carve. Unlike the others, he wasn't looking at my bloodied back. He was looking at my face. There was no pity in his gaze, no morbid curiosity. There was recognition. It was as if he wasn't seeing the humiliation, but what was beneath it, the refusal to yield. While Corbin continued his spectacle of brutality, the stranger's gaze was the only thing that felt real in that courtyard. He saw that I didn't look away. He saw that, even while being broken, I did not bow. The lashes stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse. I was left there, in the center of the courtyard, an example for everyone. No one moved to help me, not even my own family. I saw my father look away, his face a mask of shame and fear. My mother wrung her hands, her lips thin and white. Their fear of Corbin was greater than any love they had for me. Fear was the true currency in end of the line. In that moment, I understood that I no longer had a home. The pain in my back was a burning fire, but the coldness of abandonment was an ice spreading through my chest. Despised, broken, alone. The only option was to leave, to flee into the toxic wastelands that everyone feared, because anything was better than staying there and rotting under Corbin's satisfied gaze. With darkness as my only cover, I dragged myself out of the settlement. Every step was torture. The fabric of my shirt stuck to the open wounds, and a fever was beginning to take hold of my body. The air outside was different, thicker, with a chemical taste that scratched the throat. End of the line was a hell, but at least it was a familiar hell. The wastelands were an unknown void, full of dangers I could barely imagine. I had no food, no water, no plan. I only had the pain and the certainty that I couldn't go back. I walked for hours, or maybe it was minutes. Time lost all meaning. The landscape was a nightmare of twisted metal, crumbling concrete structures, and the red dust that clung to everything. The wind carried strange whispers, the sound of debris shifting in the dark. My legs finally gave out. I fell to my knees near a leaning concrete wall, the last remnant of some old-world structure. The energy just left me. My body trembled uncontrollably. I leaned my head against the cool surface of the concrete, and the darkness at the edges of my vision began to swallow everything. I was going to die here. A part of me felt relieved, the end of the pain. I closed my eyes. That's when I heard it. Not the wind, but the soft sound of footsteps in the dust. Deliberate, steady steps. My body tensed, but I had no strength to move. A shadow fell over me. I forced my eyes open and saw the silhouette of the nomad, Kale, against the pale, sickly moon. He didn't say a word. He just knelt beside me. For a moment, I thought he was there to finish the job, maybe take my boots or anything else of value I had. Instead, he slipped one arm under my knees and the other across my back, with a care that seemed out of place in this broken world. The contact on my wounded back made me gasp in pain, but it was a muffled sound. He lifted me from the ground as if I weighed nothing. He smelled of leather, wood smoke, and something clean like ozone after a storm. It was the opposite of the stench of end of the line. As he carried me away into the darkness, the last thing I saw was my own tracks being slowly erased by the wind. I woke up to the taste of water in my mouth. Not the metallic, warm water of end of the line, but clean, cold, purified water. Someone was holding a metal canteen to my lips. I blinked, trying to focus. The light was soft, coming from a single lamp glowing in a corner. I was lying on my stomach on a makeshift but comfortable bed made of furs and fabrics. The air was fresh, circulating. I was in some kind of shelter, a functional and organized space amidst the ruins. Metal parts were stacked in one corner, tools hung on a wall. It was a survivor's den, not a savage's grave. Kale moved away when he saw I was awake. He moved through the shelter with an economy of motion, a calm that was deeply unsettling. He wasn't threatening. Instinctively, I looked for a weapon, an escape route. My body was tense, ready to fight or run, but he did nothing to provoke that reaction. He simply picked up a small ceramic bowl and came to my side. In it was a dark green paste. The smell was herbal, strong, but not unpleasant. Without a word, he began to apply the ointment to my back. The contact was cold and stung immediately, but it was soon replaced by a sense of relief, a welcome numbness that soothed the burning skin. My mind, trained to distrust everything and everyone, struggled to understand. Why this effort? Why spend precious resources, purified water, medicinal ointments, on a dying stranger? Kindness was such a rare commodity that it was almost always a trap. My voice came out hoarse and weak, a mere scratch in my throat. Why did you save me? He stopped what he was doing for a moment, his eyes meeting mine in the reflection of a polished piece of metal on the wall. His answer was short, direct, and it hit the very core of who I was in that moment. Because you didn't bow. Those words disarmed me more than any threat ever could have. He didn't see me as a victim. He didn't save me out of pity. He saved me because he saw the same thing I felt inside myself, the spark of defiance that refused to be extinguished. Respect was the foundation of our first conversation, not compassion. It was a much more solid foundation to build on in this world. I relaxed for the first time in days, the knot of tension in my stomach loosening a bit. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely alone. I let him finish tending to my wounds, a comfortable silence settling between us. That silence was a language of its own, a promise of safety that no words could offer. The days turned into a routine of healing. Kale cared for me with a quiet efficiency. He would leave for hours, returning with pieces of old tech, strange plants, or small animals he had hunted. He never asked me about what happened in the courtyard, and I never offered the information. He already knew what he needed to know. One afternoon, as I was sitting near the entrance of the shelter, looking at the desolate landscape outside, I saw it. A column of dark smoke rising on the horizon, exactly in the direction of end of the line. It was a dense, oily smoke, the smoke of something burning that shouldn't be burning. My heart sank. Kale arrived shortly after, his face as impassive as ever, but his eyes told me he had seen it too. He stood beside me, following my gaze to the dark smudge in the sky. "It's my workshop," I said, my voice empty. It wasn't a question. He just nodded once. Corbin gave the order. They had burned everything. My tools, my blueprints, the little useless trinkets I kept from the old world. The last trace of my identity, of Lena the engineer, turned to ash and carried away by the wind. It was a clear message from Corbin. You no longer exist. You have been erased. I sat there, feeling an emptiness so profound it felt like the ground would open up and swallow me. I had nothing left. I was no longer a daughter, no longer an engineer, no longer a resident of End of the Line. I was a ghost. Kale left me with my silent grief. Hours later, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in orange and purple, he approached. He didn't say "I'm sorry" or any other useless platitude. Instead, he held out his hand. In his palm was a piece of metal, small and irregular, that he had polished until it shone like a dark mirror. He placed it in my hand. It was warm from his body heat. Where I grew up, people who went through something like this, who survived the fire, were given a new name, he said, his voice low and calm. They would call someone like you Ember. I looked at the piece of metal in my hand, then at him. Brasa, Ember. Something that survived the fire, he continued, and still holds enough heat to start a new flame. The word settled in me. It wasn't a name given out of pity. It was a name forged in respect, in resilience. It was an acknowledgement of what I had endured and what I could become. Lena was dead, burned along with her workshop. But something else was there, something small and hot, held deep in my chest. I closed my hand around the metal. Ember, I repeated. The word sounded right. It was mine. The decision to go back wasn't sudden. It grew inside me, nurtured by the new identity Kale had given me. I was no longer a victim on the run. I was Ember. And Ember doesn't hide. I spent the next few weeks absorbing everything Kale taught me. How to find water, how to identify useful parts in the toxic junk, how to move without being seen, and most importantly, how to build. With his makeshift tools and the parts we scavenged, my hands came back to life. I created small devices, fixed broken mechanisms. The engineer in me hadn't died. She just needed a new purpose. And then I built the purifier. It wasn't big, but it was efficient. Using a power cell we found in an abandoned military vehicle and a filtration system I designed with membranes I extracted from old medical equipment, I created something end-of-the-line desperately needed. Their water was rationed, poorly filtered, the source of many illnesses. Corbin controlled the water, but he couldn't actually clean it. I could. "I'm going back," I announced to Kale one morning. He didn't try to stop me. He just watched as I prepared, the water purifier carefully packed in a canvas bag. He knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about power. Not Corbin's power based on force and fear, but my power based on skill and knowledge. The walk back was different. I was no longer limping toward death, but marching toward a confrontation. When the gates of End of the Line appeared on the horizon, I felt no fear. I felt a cold calm. Kale walked with me to the entrance, his presence a silent rock by my side. He wouldn't go in with me. This was my battle. I walked into the central courtyard. It was the middle of the day, and the place was full of people, moving with their usual listless slowness. Heads turned as I passed. Murmurs spread like wildfire. The whipped woman, the dead one. She's back. I ignored them all. I went straight to the crude metal table that stood in the center of the courtyard, the same place where Corbin delivered his decrees. With a deliberate movement, I took the water purifier out of the bag and placed it on the table. I connected the small power cell, took a bucket of the dirty, stagnant water that was kept there for common use, and poured it into the intake funnel. I flipped the switch. The machine hummed softly, and a stream of crystal-clear water began to trickle from the output spout into a clean container I had placed underneath. A shocked silence fell over the courtyard. It was deeper than the silence during my punishment. People stopped what they were doing. They looked from the purifier to me, their faces a mixture of amazement and disbelief. I didn't say a word. I just let the proof of my skill speak for itself. I had gone into their hell, the wastelands, and returned not with a weapon, but with a miracle. A technology that could save lives, that could alleviate their suffering. Something the all-powerful Corbin was never able to give them. I had challenged him not with violence, but with competence. I undermined his authority in front of everyone, without raising my voice. From the settlement entrance, I could feel Kale's gaze. His presence was a silent guarantee that no matter what happened next, I was no longer alone. I was Ember, and I was just beginning to burn. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like for more stories like this. The water purifier stood in the courtyard like a silent monument to my defiance. I didn't wait to see Corbin's reaction. The message had been delivered. Kale and I retreated to the relative safety of our shelter, but we knew this was the beginning, not the end. The air in the wastelands seemed charged with a new tension. For the next few weeks, we lived in a state of constant alert. Every expedition for parts or food was calculated. Every noise on the wind was analyzed. Kale taught me to read the ground, to distinguish the track of a mutant animal from that of a man in worn-out boots. My engineer's mind absorbed everything, cataloging patterns, assessing probabilities. Survival itself became an engineering problem, a complex system of threats and resources that needed constant optimization. Our partnership evolved in silence. We didn't need many words. A hand gesture indicated a safe route. A quick glance communicated imminent danger. We worked together as if we were two gears in the same machine, each anticipating the other's move. He was the wisdom of the land, the sharp intuition. I was the logic, the ability to see the potential in a piece of rusted metal, to understand how the pieces of a broken world could be joined to create something new. In the quiet of our refuge, I forged a new tool for myself, a blade. It wasn't a sword, not a fancy combat knife. It was a tool of survival, made from the suspension spring of an old vehicle, sharpened to a cruelly effective edge, with the weight balanced to fit perfectly in my hand. Kale watched the whole process, his face impassive, but I saw a flicker of approval in his eyes. He wasn't arming me for revenge. He was watching me arm myself for the future. The confrontation happened on a day when the sky was the color of lead. We were exploring the guts of an old manufacturing complex, a carcass of steel and concrete that promised rare electronic components. The place was a labyrinth of dark corridors and cavernous halls where the sound of our footsteps echoed strangely. I was focused on a control panel, my hands working delicately to extract a series of intact relays. It was Kale who sensed it first. He tensed, his head cocked, like an animal catching the scent of a predator on the wind. He said nothing, just placed a hand on my shoulder. The signal was clear. Stop. Silence. At first I heard nothing but the steady drip of water somewhere in the distance. Then I caught it. A scraping sound. A boot dragging on debris-covered concrete. It wasn't the careful step of a survivor. It was the careless step of someone who doesn't fear being heard, of someone who hunts in a pack. There were several of them. Kale motioned with his chin toward a metal catwalk above us. We moved without a sound, climbing a rusty service ladder until we found cover behind a large, dormant turbine. From there, we could see the floor below. There were 4 men. I recognized 2 of them. They were Corbin's watchdogs, men whose only skills were violence and blind obedience. Their faces were familiar from the courtyard, always hovering near their master. They moved with an arrogance that didn't belong in the wastelands, scanning the place, clearly looking for us. "He didn't like your gift," Kale whispered, his voice so low it was almost part of the wind whistling through the broken windows. "It wasn't meant for him to like," I replied, my hand instinctively tightening on the handle of the blade I'd carried on my back. The fear was there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was buried under layers of anger and determination. They weren't here to take me back. They were here to erase me for good. They split up, searching the area. It was a stupid, noisy hunting tactic. We waited, controlling our breathing, letting them get deeper into the industrial maze. Kale and I exchanged a look. The plan formed between us in that instant, without a single word. Divide and conquer. He gestured to the left, where 2 of the men had disappeared behind a row of heavy machinery. I nodded, understanding that the other 2 were mine. It was a test. Everything up to that point had been theory. Now was practice. I dropped from the catwalk with the agility of a cat, using the shadows as my ally. The 2 men were talking in low voices, their words echoing in the cavernous space. One of them was large, with arms like pistons. The other was thinner, more nervous. They didn't see me until it was too late. I emerged from behind a concrete pillar, the dim light from a broken window glinting off my blade. The thin man saw me first, his eyes widening in shock and a hint of fear. He opened his mouth to shout a warning, but I was already moving. My target wasn't him, but the larger one, the real threat. I used my smaller size to my advantage, ducking under his reach as he turned. My blade didn't cut flesh, but the tendon behind his knee. He roared, more in surprise than pain, and went down heavily, his leg giving out. The thin man, overcoming his shock, lunged with a piece of iron pipe. I dodged his clumsy swing, the pipe hitting the concrete pillar with a dull thud, sending sparks into the darkness. The fight wasn't pretty. It was desperate and brutal. I wasn't a trained warrior, but I was an engineer. I understood leverage, stress points, structural weaknesses, and a human body is just a complex machine. I blocked another blow with my forearm, feeling the impact vibrate to the bone. The pain fueled me. I rolled to the side, using the momentum to get up and drive my elbow into his solar plexus. He gasped, the air leaving his lungs in a hiss. While he was doubled over, I disarmed him, the iron pipe clattering to the floor with a metallic sound that seemed deafening. On the other side of the hall, I heard a dull thud and a cry cut short. Cale was handling his part. I couldn't afford to look. The large man was trying to get up, his face twisted into a mask of rage. He underestimated me. They all did. That was their mistake. The thin man came at me again, this time with bare hands, trying to grab me. He was stronger, but I was faster. I stomped on his foot with all my strength, feeling the bones crunch under my boot. He screamed, a sharp sound of agony. It was the opening I needed. With a quick move, I got past him and behind the large man, who was still struggling to get to his feet on his injured leg. I wrapped my arm around his neck, finding the exact pressure point Cale had shown me, the place where consciousness could be switched off like a light. I squeezed. He thrashed with a wild strength, his elbows slamming into my ribs, but I held on, my whole body trembling with the effort. His struggles grew weaker, his movements slower, until he finally went limp in my arms and collapsed to the ground. I stood there, panting, my heart hammering against my ribs. Adrenaline sang in my veins, making everything sharp and unreal. Cale emerged from the shadows, unharmed. The other two men were on the ground, still and silent. He looked at the two men I had taken down, then at me. His face, as always, was calm, but his eyes held a deep respect that was worth more than any praise. He hadn't come to save me. He had come to fight beside me. We were partners. We were equals. I walked over to the goon who was still conscious, the thin one, cowering on the floor, holding his broken foot and looking at me like I was a demon from the shadows. I crouched beside him, my blade still in hand. His breathing was fast and shallow, his eyes full of terror. I leaned in close, my voice no louder than a whisper, but carrying the weight of every lash, every humiliation, every piece of me they had tried to break. Tell Corbin, I said, my voice cold and steady, that the next time he sends his dogs, they won't be coming back. I let the words hang in the stagnant factory air. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. I stood up and turned away, leaving him with the message and his fallen comrades. Cale was already gathering our things, the relays I had dropped during the fight. We moved together out of that place of violence, leaving behind the echoes of battle and stepping back into the gray light of the wastelands. That day, something changed. Ember was no longer just surviving the fire. She was learning to control it, and the whole world was about to feel her heat. The promise I made that day in the factory changed the dynamic of our existence. Our shelter, once a refuge, was now a known target. The security we had built was an illusion we could no longer afford. That same night, we packed the essentials in silence. There was no discussion. The need was obvious and mutual. We would leave that place behind and venture deeper into the wastelands, into territories that even the most experienced nomads considered dangerous. It was the only way to stay ahead of Corbin and his wrath. The journey was arduous. We left the familiar industrial ruins behind and entered a landscape that was alien and hostile. Forests of petrified metal, whose trees were the support beams of collapsed highways, scratched at the sky. Chemical swamps bubbled with an iridescent sludge that could dissolve boot leather in minutes. We crossed plains of black glass, where some ancient calamity had melted the sand into a smooth, cutting surface. Every day was a new challenge, a new lesson in survival. Cale was my guide, his innate knowledge of the environment keeping us alive. He taught me to read the wind, to predict the toxic storms that swept the plains, to find pockets of breathable air in underground caves. And I, with my engineer's mind, found solutions. I built makeshift air filters from charcoal and fabric. I developed a simple pulley system to safely descend steep cliffs. I fixed Cale's long-range communicator with a handful of wires and a bit of solder. He gave me the knowledge to survive. I gave him the tools to thrive. Our communication deepened beyond gestures. We talked about mechanics, about mutated botany, about the stars that seemed frighteningly bright in the light pollution-free sky. But we never talked about the past. It was a tacitly forbidden territory, a land of ghosts neither of us wanted to visit. The external threat of Corbin and his men gave way to a quieter battle. The internal healing of the wounds we carried. Mine were visible, the scars on my back a permanent map of my humiliation. His were deeper, hidden behind his calm eyes and vigilant silence. After weeks of travel, we found the place. It was an unlikely oasis, a small canyon nestled between rock formations that protected it from the worst of the winds. At the bottom, a spring of surprisingly clean water trickled from the rock, creating a small stream that supported strange but lush vegetation. It was defensible, isolated, and held the most precious resource of all, drinkable water. There, we decided to build our new home. Construction became our language. It was an act of creation in a world devoted to decay. It was the materialization of our partnership. I drew the plans in the sand, designing a shelter that used the canyon wall as its main support, with a rainwater collection system and solar panels we salvaged from a fallen satellite. Cale, with his tireless strength and practical knowledge, made my designs a reality. He knew which rock would bear weight, which mutated wood was pest-resistant, how to position our home to catch the full morning sun without exposing us to distant observers. Day after day, we worked side by side. The sound of my improvised hammers and his tools echoed through the small canyon, a sound of purpose and construction. We set up a more robust purification system. We reinforced the walls with metal plates we dragged from a vehicle carcass. I created a small workshop for myself, a sanctuary of parts and projects. He planted a garden, using seeds he carried in a leather pouch and cultivating plants that were both food and medicine. Slowly, painfully, in the midst of desolation, we built a life, a home. With physical safety came stillness. And in the stillness, the ghosts finally came knocking at our door. The nights were the worst for me. I would wake up in a cold sweat, the echo of the whip still on my skin, Corbin's smug face etched in my mind. In those moments, Cale didn't tell me it was okay. He didn't offer empty words of comfort. He would simply light a small lamp, the soft, warm glow filling our shelter, and begin to work on some quiet task, polishing a tool, mending a piece of leather. His calm presence was an anchor, pulling me out of the whirlpool of my memories and back to the safety of the present we had built together. He gave me space to breathe, to find my own way back from the darkness. His revelation came on a particularly quiet night. We were sitting outside our shelter, watching the stars. During an expedition that day, we had found the remains of an old playground, and I had found a small plastic doll, dirty and missing an eye. I had cleaned it and placed it on a shelf in my workshop, a small, sad reminder of a lost world. Cale saw it, and something in his expression shifted, a fleeting shadow I had never seen before. That night, under the gaze of 1,000 stars, he spoke. His voice was low, almost a murmur, and he didn't look at me, but at the infinite darkness above. I had a sister, he began, and the words seemed to cost him an immense effort. Her name was Shapa. It means red foot. She was 4 years younger than me. He paused, and I remained silent, knowing that any sound from me could break the fragile spell of that moment. I was 10 when the collapse happened. Nobody knew what was going on. The lights went out, the cars stopped. There was panic. People became something else. Worse than animals, because animals kill out of necessity. He traced an invisible pattern in the dust with his finger. Our family tried to head west, away from the cities. We thought it would be safer, but the chaos was everywhere. One day, a group of armed men stopped our vehicle. They were taking everything: food, fuel, supplies. They were taking people too. His gaze grew distant, focused on a memory I could only imagine how terrible it was. My father tried to fight. They killed him. Just like that. My mother screamed and they took her. I grabbed Shapa and I ran. Ran for the hills, for the trees. I was holding her so tight, she was crying, but she was trying to be brave. His voice broke for an instant, a single crack in his stoic armor. We hid for days, but they found us. I was just a boy. I tried to fight, but they threw me aside like I was nothing. One of them grabbed Shapa. I remember her eyes. She didn't scream. She just looked at me. That look, she was asking me to save her, and I couldn't do anything. He took a deep, shaky breath in the cold night. I never saw her again. The silence that followed was filled with the pain of decades. I understood everything in that moment. his loneliness, his distrust of groups and men like Corbin, his need to keep moving, to never put down roots for too long. And most importantly, I understood why he had saved me. In my defiance, in my refusal to bow, he didn't just see me. He saw the sister he couldn't save, and maybe somehow he saw a chance to do it differently. My own suffering, my own humiliation, seemed small in comparison to the loss he had carried for almost 30 years. The scars on my back were from pain, but his were from powerlessness, the worst pain of all. Without thinking, moved by an instinct deeper than self-preservation, I reached out my hand and placed it on his. His skin was rough, calloused from work and survival, but it was warm. It was the first physical contact I had initiated between us that wasn't functional or accidental. It wasn't a gesture of pity. It was a gesture of recognition, of communion. I had no words that could heal a wound like his, so I offered the only thing I had, my presence. A silent acknowledgement that he was no longer alone in his pain. He looked down at my hand on his, and then his eyes met mine in the dim light. For the first time, the barrier in his gaze completely dissolved, and I saw the 10-year-old boy hidden inside the hardened survivor. He turned his hand and laced his fingers through mine. His grip was firm, an anchor in the darkness. In that touch, our bond was sealed. It was no longer a partnership of convenience or mutual respect. It was forged in the shared trauma of a broken world, in loss and survival. We were two embers that had survived different fires, and together, in the silent vastness of the wastelands, we finally found enough warmth to start feeling at home. The years that followed our escape and the confrontation at the factory weren't measured by a calendar, but by the seasons that swept the wastelands. They were measured by the slow healing of my skin and my soul. They were counted in the growing number of solar panels we managed to install, in the flourishing of our hidden garden, and in the depth of the comfortable silence that settled between me and Kale. Our small oasis in the canyon became a sanctuary, a point of order in a universe of chaos. The work was constant, a daily battle against entropy. We reinforced our defenses, created irrigation systems for the garden, and my workshop became a laboratory of innovation, where I turned the trash of a dead world into tools for a new life. Time softened our edges. The memories of the courtyard and my humiliation didn't disappear, but they lost their power to haunt my dreams. They became part of my story, the foundation upon which my new identity was built. Kale changed too. The weight on his shoulders seemed lighter. He smiled more, a subtle twitch at the corner of his mouth that I learned to value more than any words. He found a purpose, not just in surviving, but in building. The ghost of his sister Shapa never left him. But I believe that by creating a safe place, he was in some way honoring her memory in a way that revenge or hatred never could. Our solitude was broken 3 years after the fight at the factory. We found a family, a couple, and their young son, on the brink of starvation, their makeshift vehicle broken down miles from our canyon. Our first reaction was caution, an instinct engraved in us by the harshness of the world. We watched them from a distance for a full day. We saw the way the parents split the last of their food with their child, the desperate kindness in their gestures. We didn't see the mark of brutality on them, only the deep wariness of those who had fought and lost. We made a decision together, in silence, as we did with everything. That night, we approached their precarious camp, not as threats, but with an offering, a container of clean water and a dense loaf of bread made from the flour we ground from dried roots. The fear in their eyes was palpable, but thirst and hunger were stronger. They accepted. We guided them to our canyon. It took weeks for the distrust in their eyes to fade, months for the boy to laugh for the first time. They were the first. After them, others came. Lost nomads, runaways from settlements even worse than end of the line. We never looked for them, but somehow they found us. Our oasis became a little secret whispered on the wasteland winds. It was through one of these newcomers, a trader named Elias, that news from the outside world reached us. Elias was a thin, shrewd man who traveled between the settlements, trading information as easily as he traded parts. He arrived at our canyon, guided by vague rumors and a lot of luck. He didn't know who we were, seeing us only as the leaders of a reclusive and successful community. One night, around the fire, he began to talk about end of the line. "It's a strange place these days," he said, stirring his mug of stew. "The overseer, Corbin, he's still there, but he's like an old king in a crumbling castle. The fear he used to command, it's turning sour." Cale and I exchanged a quick glance over the fire. I kept my face neutral, inviting him to continue with a simple nod. "Years ago," Elias went on, "he was the law. No one challenged him. But then, something changed. People started telling a story. A legend, really." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "They talk about a woman, an engineer that Corbin tried to break publicly, whipped her in the courtyard for refusing to be his. But she didn't break. She survived, fled into the wastelands, and came back." My heart gave a dull thud in my chest. It was surreal to hear my own story told as a folktale by a stranger. "She didn't come back with an army," Elias said, his eyes shining with the drama of the narrative. "She came back alone and left a gift in the middle of the courtyard, a machine that purified water. No one had ever seen anything like it. She showed everyone that Corbin's power, based on controlling scarce resources, was a lie. She showed that knowledge, the ability to create, was the real power. After that, she disappeared again, but the idea remained." I listened, fascinated and a little frightened by how my story had grown and transformed. "They call her the Wasteland Woman," Elias said. "Some call her Ember, saying she was born from the fire of Corbin's punishment." He took a sip of his stew. "Since then, things started to change and end of the line. Little things at first. A generator Corbin controlled would mysteriously break and no one could fix it. People started building their own hidden water filters based on crude drawings passed from hand to hand. Small acts of sabotage, of independence. Corbin would get furious, but he couldn't rule by fear anymore. Because now people had something to believe in, even if it was just a story. Hope is harder to kill than a man." Elias then told me about the ambush in the factory. In the legend, the fight had become epic. I was described as a phantom warrior, moving through the shadows, and Cale as a protective spirit of the wastelands. My message to Corbin had become a legendary oath, repeated in whispers. "They say that after that day, Corbin never sent anyone into the wastelands after her again," Elias concluded. He knew he was no longer fighting a woman, but a symbol. That night, after Elias had gone to sleep, I lay awake for a long time, looking at my lit workshop. I never wanted to be a symbol. My return to End of the Line wasn't a calculated act to inspire a rebellion. It was a personal act, a declaration that I would not be erased. But stories once told take on a life of their own. They escape our hands and grow in people's imaginations, filling a need they have. The woman in the legend wasn't me, not exactly. She was an idealized version, an embodiment of hope for a people who had none. And I realized that, intentionally or not, I had given them the most powerful weapon of all. Proof that tyranny could be challenged, and that there was something beyond the walls of End of the Line. There was an alternative. And that alternative, this oasis of technology and security that travelers now spoke of, was my home. My name had become a legend, but my legacy was real, made of stone, metal, and the community we had, nurtured in the heart of the wasteland. Another decade passed. Time, which was once an enemy, a countdown to the next catastrophe, became a slow, steady river on which our community floated. Our canyon, once a simple refuge, was now home to nearly 30 souls. It was a place of noise and life. The sound of the hammer in my workshop mixed with the laughter of children playing by the stream. We had 3 children born there and 4 others who arrived as orphans, found by our reconnaissance patrols. Watching them grow up safe, without knowing the fear that defined my youth and Cale's, was the greatest victory I could imagine. Cale became their teacher. He taught them to read the stars, to identify plants, to respect the fragile balance of life in the wastelands. In him, I saw a peace I thought would never be possible for him. By caring for those children, he was healing the 10-year-old boy inside him, giving them the safety he couldn't give to Shapa. His pain didn't disappear, but it found a purpose, transforming into wisdom and protection. Our home wasn't a utopia. There were arguments, illnesses, challenges, but there was, above all, cooperation and a sense of shared purpose. We built a small school, an infirmary. Each person contributed their skills. We were a patchwork of broken lives that together formed something strong and whole. Cale and I grew old, The black in our hair gave way to strands of silver, like veins of precious metal in dark rock. The lines on our faces told the story of years under a relentless sun, but also of shared smiles and overcome worries. Our bodies were no longer as fast, but our movements together had a synchronicity that only decades of partnership could create. Often, we didn't need words. A look, a touch, a nod was enough to communicate entire pages of thoughts and feelings. The final scene unfolded on a clear, cold night. We were sitting at our favorite lookout point, a high rock ledge on the edge of our canyon. From there, on nights like this, you could see the distant lights of End of the Line, a tiny smudge of electric glow in the vast ocean of darkness. It was no longer a sight that brought me pain or anger. It was just a light, a distant reminder of a past that seemed to belong to someone else. According to Elias, who still visited us once a year, Corbin had died a few years ago. Not in a battle, not in an uprising. He simply got sick and withered away. His authority had eroded so much that his death was barely noticed. End of the Line continued on, a stagnant place, now governed by an inept council, a ghost of its former self. I looked at Cale. He was watching the lights too, his profile silhouetted against the starry sky. His hand found mine, a gesture as natural and familiar as breathing. I leaned against him, feeling the warmth and solidity of his shoulder. I thought about the journey. The 26-year-old girl, proud and defiant, dragged into a courtyard to be broken. The woman who fled into the desert expecting death. The ember who was reborn from respect and necessity. And the woman I was now, a leader, a builder, a partner. A survivor who had found not just peace, but joy. My free hand instinctively went to my back, tracing the scars that were still there, now pale, smooth lines under the fabric of my shirt. They didn't hurt anymore. They were just part of the topography of my body, like the canyons and mountains of the wastelands themselves. They were proof that I had survived. They tried to burn us to ashes, I whispered, the words forming in the silence of the night, a reflection that came from the depths of my soul. It was the sum of everything, the whip, the burned workshop, the chase, Corbin's attempt to erase me from existence. Cale turned his face to me, his dark eyes reflecting the starlight. He didn't need time to think. His answer came from a place of deep truth, a truth they had built together over all those years. And yet, he replied, his voice a soft, steady baritone, you became the flame that can relight the world. His words hung between us, not as a compliment, but as a statement of fact, a truth. I hadn't sought to be a savior, but by saving myself, by building a life based on skill and respect instead of force and fear, we had created a beacon. I looked past the distant lights of End of the Line to our own valley. I saw the soft lights of our small settlement glowing below us. I heard the distant sound of a lullaby one of the mothers was singing to her child. I felt the firm grip of Cale's hand in mine. This was the legacy, not the legend of the wasteland woman, but the living, breathing reality of this sanctuary. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like for more stories like this. The peace we had won was not an absence of conflict, but a vibrant presence of life, hope, and community. The flame wasn't relighting the whole world, not yet. But here, in this small pocket of existence, it burned strong and bright, warming all who sheltered near it. And that was more than enough. It was everything.